This is a republic, if you can keep it, with Mark Brewer and Jeff Timmer.
I'm Mark Brewer. Welcome to Donald's Not-So-Successful Party episode of A Republic If You Can Keep It. Trump's heavily hyped Great American State Fair has been labeled the All-American Fire Festival and all the failure that goes with it. Crowds are non-existent. It's even so bad that Vanilla Ice pulled out at the last minute.
I'm Jeff Timmer. I've had larger crowds in my shower than Trump's latest shit-tastical, narcissistic, failed attempt at performative jingoism. Try to say that 5 times really fast. Voting has begun in Michigan's primary election, headlined by the Republicans' three-way battle for the party's gubernatorial nomination and the Democrats' three-way contest for the U.S. Senate nomination.
Election season is also now bringing with it endorsements of candidates by other politicians, special interest groups, and newspapers. Do they still matter? Which ones are relevant? Which ones are meaningless? And the ad wars are also underway, if not heating up, with competitive races all over the place in Michigan. Our listeners can plan on seeing tens of millions of dollars worth of ads on your TV and computer screens between now and early August, and even more between August and November.
The issue of Trump's massive corruption has moved front and center with disclosures of how the White House has become the center of a $2.2 billion POTUS payday. It's a 24/7, 365 smash and grab with naked bribery added as a sweetener. And that doesn't take into account the billions falling into the greedy hands of his sons, son-in-law, and his kleptocrat cronies.
And if that weren't bad enough, there are now reports that Trump staged a hostile takeover of the 250th anniversary celebration of the United States independence to enrich his political allies, harvest voter data, and promote Christian nationalist ideology, according to a congressional investigation released just today. The interim report, From Vanity to Insanity, How the White House Cheated the American People Out of Their 250th Birthday, outlines a web of alleged corruption, wire fraud, and pay-to-play schemes orchestrated through a shadow corporation embedded within the National Park Foundation. Happy birthday, America.
Rumors are growing of a Perry Johnson-Mike Cox teaming up to consolidate the loudly vocal anti-James sentiment among the hardcore MAGAs. It's got to happen soon or not at all. Also, it would be crude and juvenile of me to make a joke about a Johnson-Cox ticket, so I won't do that.
And the United States Supreme Court wrapped up its term this week with a series of monumental last-day, last-minute decisions, including one affecting campaign finance coordination between parties and their candidates, defying Trump and Republican efforts to disenfranchise military and other voters who use mail to send in their ballots, upholding the Republicans' fixation on the genitals of child athletes, and rebuffing Trump by upholding the birthright citizenship established in the 14th Amendment.
Mark, why don't we start there with the Supreme Court decisions? You know, they wrapped up their annual term. They waited till the last day, handed down some big, substantial decisions. You know, start where you want, and let's dissect the ones that really make a difference.
Well, birthright citizenship has been a big target of Trump's ever since he became president again. While the decision was not a surprise, the 14th Amendment is very clear that people born in this country are citizens of this country. It was very disappointing to see that it wasn't even close to a unanimous decision. On the constitutional issue, Jeff, it was 6-3. There were 3 justices who thought that the 14th Amendment allowed the denial of citizenship to people born in this country. Justice Kavanaugh only agreed that the order that was under consideration violated the statute. So it was not very encouraging that we have so many justices on the United States Supreme Court willing to go down that path. Of course, the other thing that happened recently in the Supreme Court's waning days was that they've now allowed Trump to end a temporary program under which frankly, hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people who were victims of oppression, criminal activity, and so forth abroad were living in this country. Supreme Court said Trump can end that program and send those people back overseas, even though many of them have been in this country for decades. They have no connections to these countries where they're about to be sent. So while birthright citizenship was an important victory, we're about to see massive disruption and I think exportation of hundreds of thousands of people who've lived here for decades.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there, and it's done I think a fairly good job of exposing the inconsistency and hypocrisy of the so-called contextualist view of the U.S. Constitution. The same justices that would have used the kind of the black letter test of apply it to the Second Amendment. They want to pretend desperately that the 14th Amendment doesn't say what it says. The Republicans in the MAGA sphere out in the social media and the digital sphere are just apoplectic about this. That they're like calling for pregnancy tests to be given to any girls and women entering the country on foreign visas or passports. They're talking about not letting pregnant women on flights that will go over U.S. airspace. It's just it's insanity, and it's the racist nativism that is exposed in the I guess the reaction to this by the Republicans should shock nobody. Racism is a feature, not a bug, of today's Republican Party. The forces that have long existed on the fringes and under the rocks and in the dark corners of the Republican Party have been welcomed into the daylight, watered, fed, nourished, and they now control the party and its communications. And the sentiment from top to bottom, from Donald Trump right down to the grassroots precinct delegates, are white Christo nationalism, and any American who doesn't fit their ideal of the Ward Cleaver world of the 1950s, and Donald Trump just discovered that Eisenhower was a general, by the way, speaking of the 1950s. His latest, not many people know that, but Eisenhower was a general, which means Trump didn't know it until he read it on a teleprompter. But anyway, they have this idyllic lily white version. The Supreme Court is doing its best to turn back the clock, to where I guess Alabama and Mississippi have kept it since the 1950s, with removing black representation from Congress and the legislatures, taking away voting rights, and now trying to erode and chip away at the core of the freedoms that were enshrined in the Constitution after the Civil War to deal with slavery and others who were denied U.S. citizenship with anti-Chinese laws, anti-Native American sentiment, and of course slavery and Jim Crow.
Yeah, Jeff, no, you're right. This is a very serious divide and a very serious issue in this country. We in the United States have long rejected the idea that citizenship could be based on ethnicity or race or religion. That's very common throughout the world, that you cannot be a citizen of particular countries unless you're a member of their faith or their nationality or their race. We've rejected that. And we say to all comers here in the United States, you can be a citizen here if you believe in our ideals, if you believe in democracy, if you believe in pluralism, you believe in freedom of speech and freedom of religion. And we've been a real beacon, frankly, to the world because of that. To see this resort by Trump, by Vance, by so many elements of the Republican Party back to a nativist, racial approach to this, that you're only a citizen of this country if you were born here, or if you can trace your history back several generations, it's repugnant. But we can understand what the goal is here. It's to, sanitize and whitewash the United States, saying you're only a legitimate citizen here if you're white, if you're Christian, if you can trace your history back, maybe even as far back as the Mayflower, as far as some of them are concerned. And that's just, again, it's anti-American, it's un-American, it's not what this country has stood for. And so we are embarked on a tremendous debate and fight over what it means to be an American here on the eve of the 4th of July. It's a very serious fight. The United States should not become like these other countries where citizenship is defined by these other characteristics. America has been a great idea, a noble idea in the world, and I hope we can keep it that way. But if we can, Jeff, maybe we shift back and talk about some of these other court cases, because I think there's some strong implications there for some of the other topics you and I deal with from week to week. There have been a number of voting rights cases. We previously talked about the gutting of the Voting Rights Act that occurred earlier in the term. But Trump also got rebuffed this week on a Trump and Republican Party effort. It's really voter suppression, to say that ballots received after Election Day can't be counted. It's just appalling concept generally, but particularly offensive because this would disenfranchise many of our military members and their dependents living overseas who have difficulty voting as it is and have difficulty in their ballots back. And so many states, including Michigan, allow those ballots to come back up to 6 days after an election and still get counted. Well, Trump's view was, nope, we're not going to do that. Well, thankfully, the Supreme Court rebuffed that this week. But again, there were a handful of justices who thought, well, that's okay. That's okay. Election day is election day. And those ballots come in a minute after 8 p.m. on election night. That's too bad. And this actually adds to, Jeff, some of the things that encouraging developments we've been seeing in the lower courts. This past week, the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, which is the federal court of appeals that covers Michigan, said that Michigan does not have to give up its voter file to the Department of Justice. That's about the 10th court that has said that around the country, as Trump has been trying to assemble these state voter files for pretty nefarious purposes. Also, too, just in the last, I think, 24 hours, his attempt to use the Postal Service to somehow manipulate and control absentee ballot in the country got rebuffed by a federal judge. I'm sure that's not over, and they will continue to look for other means. But thankfully, at least, starting with the Supreme Court this week and with these lower courts, we've seen a lack of success by Trump in these voter suppression efforts. I'm sure they'll continue. They'll try other things now, whether it's with birthright citizenship or these voting rights cases. But at least on that front, there was something to celebrate this past week.
Yeah, and I certainly think that the cries that we're hearing all around from legal scholars, from court watchers, from those who are concerned about the health and direction of our democracy and the rule of law, are rightfully worried about the way this Supreme Court has been corrupted by Donald Trump and his appointments and his naked thumb on the scale. I mean, when you look there's no liberty or freedom that Sam Alito or Clarence Thomas would ever side with, let alone the U.S. Constitution. And there was an incident on the last day of the court session where Nina Totenberg, the longtime court reporter for NPR, mistakenly had overheard that Alito was going to be announcing his retirement and opening up a vacancy for Trump to appoint a new justice, while the Republicans still certainly control the U.S. Senate with their narrow majority there. That was quickly rescinded, but it does open the debate. If Alito or Thomas, who are very old and have, unless they're so, in the case of Clarence Thomas, if he's ready for a new, $250,000 RV gifted by a donor who has a case in front of the Supreme Court, there's not much keeping them on the court, because they would not want to give a Democratic president the opportunity to appoint their successors. They're the two most ardent partisans on the Supreme Court right now, and given the uncertainty of where the control for the U.S. Senate is going, they may not be able to afford to wait until Trump's last 2 years to make their future plans and announce their retirements. But I have to imagine there's a whole lot of political debate going on in the White House and other circles, the Federalist Society circles, about opening up this can of worms and injecting it more vocally, stridently into the election calculus that is taking place over the next 4 months, raising those stakes with the one or two open seats on the Supreme Court. So I think that's what we have to watch for here, is the intrigue. Or if they do in fact lose, if the Republicans do in fact lose control of the U.S. Senate, do they try to shove through a fast confirmation in the lame duck between election and New Year's with, Mitch McConnell, who knows what state he's in since his latest health episode yesterday. There's been very little reporting on it. But I could see it being one of McConnell's last acts as a living human U.S. senator to stick his thumb in the eye of democracy one more time.
Yeah, Jeff, and I don't want to, mislead our listeners by, what I just talked about in terms of some success on the judicial front. This court has greatly expanded Trump's executive power. One of the decisions that came down this week lets Trump fire the heads and the members of every independent agency except perhaps the Federal Reserve, which means the independence of the Federal Trade Commission, the NLRB, the Labor Relations Board, and many, many other agencies is now in serious jeopardy. Those, whatever you may think of what those agencies were designed to do, they have functioned independently pretty well over the last several decades. But this could lead to their complete politicalization and really turn them into nothing more than puppets of the presidents. But all this, Jeff, too, has fueled more interest in, I think, reform of the Supreme Court. This week, for example, Mallory McMorrow, Democratic Senate candidate here in Michigan, endorsed expanding the Supreme Court in order to deal with some of these abuses. There's been talk of limiting the court's jurisdiction. And so when the court behaves in this way and is seen as you indicated, nothing more than Trump's puppet in many ways, it fuels that interest, that energy behind reform. So we'll be interesting to see how that plays out as well. It may not play out in the immediate near future, but with if we get a new Democratic president and a Democratic-controlled Congress, you may well see Supreme Court reform on the agenda as well.
I hope so. I mean, I've said for years, we have 13 federal circuits. We should have 13 justices, of titularly sitting atop each of the circuits. There's this number 9 is not sacrosanct. It's bounced all over the place through our history. It's been higher. It's been lower. And the last time there was any serious talk about court expansion was during the 1930s with FDR. But it is time to look at this and look at some serious systemic reforms to our judiciary and perhaps some U.S. constitutional reforms that deal with voting rights, the prevention of gerrymandering or redistricting, so that we don't have the kind of corrosive efforts that we saw initiated by the Republicans this year with their midterm redistricting, all the voter suppression acts and decisions like uh, the Calais decision, stripping away black electoral power. Yeah, and so I think the appetite for some constitutional changes could well be there in this fairly populist climate that we find the country in, where a large and growing number of voters who align with either party are becoming less enchanted with partisanship, in the growing partisanship that they're witnessing in state capitals and in Washington.
No, I think that's right, Jeff. There has long been a pending bill in the Congress to try to do something about partisan gerrymandering. And Congress does have the power to do that for federal elections. They could impose a standard in every state like we have here in Michigan with our Independent Redistricting Commission, which prohibits partisan gerrymandering, has neutral criteria, citizen commission, which I think has worked very well for us initially. That could be imposed nationally by the Congress, saying this is how congressional districts are going to be apportioned. No midterm redistricting. Heck, no redistricting every 2 years at the whim of the legislature for political reasons. You do it once, you do it under neutral criteria, there's no partisan gerrymandering, and we live with that for 10 years. Congress could do that, and I think you're right. I think the energy is growing behind those kinds of reforms.
This isn't something we've talked about so far, but it just kind of struck me. We've been talking here for something like 20 minutes, and we've highlighted the news from the last week and the big issues. But the court also upheld the lower courts, starting with the circuit, a trial court's decision, and then successive appellate court decisions upholding a finding that the President of the United States used his finger to rape a woman and have to pay her millions of dollars. And it's barely even news. It's barely news anywhere across the country. It didn't warrant mention here until we're well into the podcast. And that just shows the exhaustive fire hose of corruption and criminality in the way that Donald Trump has just completely turned normalcy and the rule of law on its head. That this is the kind of news and circumstance that should end a political career, cause an elected official to resign from office, and certainly invoke the ire not just of the other political party, but members of the Trump's political party who have any decency and humanity and belief in the rule of law, to call for him to resign. But that will never, ever happen in today's political environment, where Donald Trump, he was completely right 10, 11 years ago when he said he could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and they would not convict him. The Republicans would cheer for him if he did that, as we saw in Minneapolis. If Donald Trump was the one, pulling the trigger or assaulting the woman in Bergdorf's dressing room in New York City, they don't care. He can do anything. They will defend it. They will defend his Caligula, Nero, Louis XIV excess of extravagance and frivolous expenditures and attention to trappings of royalty, while Americans can ill afford to pay for their health care, mortgage, groceries, and put gas in their cars. The Republicans have shown that they care more about defending whatever Donald Trump wants, says, and does than they care about any single voter in the country.
John, I think that's right. No, you're right to note that the Jean Carroll, that's the woman we're talking about here. That verdict that she had against Trump, was last gasp appeal to the United States Supreme Court. They said, nope, we're not taking the case. So now she can proceed to enforce and try to collect that money. And I hope that is paid attention to, just like, Epstein files, right? We've gone through this massive set of distractions, whether it's a war in Iran or whatever it may be, one after another attempts, frankly, by the president to distract away from not only his own personal foibles, but all the things you talk about. The high cost of healthcare, the high cost of gasoline, just the difficulty people are having day to day struggling to survive in this country. Hopefully we can, get those distractions behind us and start to focus on some of these issues. And I'm encouraged that the elections, the primaries so far that we've seen here in Michigan and elsewhere around the country, are focusing on those issues. People are talking about, not just here in Michigan, but elsewhere, the high cost of living and how people are not able to make ends meet. And that's something Trump and the Republicans have no answer for. They're going to continue, as you and I have pointed out, from week to week to try to distract us, like, with the trans ruling this week, where the Supreme Court said it's okay for states to basically say we're not going to let trans athletes participate on certain athletic teams. So there's going to be continued efforts by Trump, by his allies in the states, to distract on those kinds of issues. We talked about immigration a little bit ago. I think now this massive deportation of these folks who've been here temporarily, that's going to be an issue. It's going to be something that Trump and his supporters are going to use to distract the American people as the elections loom. And it looks like a blue.
Yeah, it certainly does. And I was watching the front runner for the Republican nomination for governor in Michigan, John James, this week, just all over social media with clip after clip and posting after posting about children's sports and genitalia. The issue that American families are laser focused on as they can't afford to pay their mortgage, their health care, their groceries, or their gas tank. And then I watch Mike Rogers say with a straight face that he's the best candidate to deal with the massive corruption that's going on in politics in Washington, and never once mentioned Donald Trump. I mean, the vast enormity, the breadth and depth of corruption that is taking place in the White House and his administration and his kleptocrat cronies, as I said at the outset of this podcast, is astounding. If you could take all the corruption in U.S. history that has occurred at any level of government over the entire 250 years of our history, add them together, and the financial stake is nowhere near what happens every week in the Trump administration. They are pocketing money, they're looting. In the first term, he looted the Treasury by forcing all the government entities to use his hotels. I mean, that was taking in all this foreign money, the personal enrichment, the largesse and corruption on display internationally this week with the unveiling of the new Air Force One, which is really the Qatari Air Force One. The oil sheikhs in the Persian Gulf buying Trump's favor, giving millions and billions to his sons and his son-in-law and his close associates, as they're supposedly also negotiating, say, an end to the war in Iran, mixing business with national security, which is why you don't have civilians doing these kinds of things, which is why you have people who are confirmed by the U.S. Senate and subject to oversight of the federal government and checks and balances that exist within the Constitution. Trump is every second of his administration is a stress test on the Constitution to poke holes at it, not for the betterment of the country or to make a more perfect union, but for the betterment of Trump's bank account and to make Trump wealthier and those around him more powerful and richer. That's what Trump looks at public service as. How much can I get? How fast can I get it? And how long can I stay here to make sure that I keep stuffing the money into my pockets? He's made more in the last 15 months than he's made in his entire lifetime before that. And really, when you look at, what Trump has done with wealth over the course of his adult life, is he's never actually succeeded at making any money. He ultimately failed. This time he's had to break the country's bank and economy while he's enriching himself. But as what always happens with Trump, he'll get his in the end, and everything he has the reverse Midas touch. So everything Trump touches dies or turns to shit, and he's going to do that with, hopefully, not with the entire White House, the entire federal government, and the entire U.S. economy, but he's going to give it his damnedest to wreck everything before he finally assumes room temperature at some point within the next 20 years.
Yeah, Jeff, you're absolutely right. There been some great books that you and I and many of our listeners, I'm sure, have read over the years, right? About once the presidency is over, people talk about, well, it was the imperial presidency or it was the selling of the presidency if they're talking about the campaigns. I think the apt title for Trump's years is going to be the looting of the presidency or the monetization of the presidency, because that's what we've just seen, as you've described, on just an unprecedented scale.
More on A Republic, if you can keep it, after these messages.
When most of us think about polling, the focus is on those campaign polls telling us which candidates are winning. But the most important polls are for businesses, local governments, and nonprofits assessing the needs and wants of their customers or constituencies.
Those are polls that guide policies and lead to institutional success. Those polls have to get it right, which makes the choice of a public opinion research firm critical. Epic MRA has been trusted for more than 4 decades to get it right. Our clients have included school boards, statewide nonprofits, corporations, as well as the candidates and news media who rely on us during political campaigns. Whether it's just a couple of questions or a full in-depth survey, we're here and ready to help.
You can reach us at epicmra.com.
Hi, Ben Franklin here with a message from our finance department. They've put together a small, exclusive collection of really bitchin' merch for you. We've got our exclusive Trump's Favorite Podcast mug, perfect for those long days of reading through the latest administration indictments. We've got mugs for lovers of sanity, mugs for opponents of dumb fuckery, and finely tailored shirts for lovers of getting dressed. Just head over to the merch store on our website. This square thingy will take you there, or click on the merch store button on arepublicpodcast.com. Support democracy, support freedom, wipe out dumb fuckery. Franklin, out.
Are you looking to stay ahead of the curve on Michigan's public policy landscape? Look no further than Michigan Information and Research Service Incorporated, or MERS. MERS is your go-to source for comprehensive, nonpartisan news and analysis on Michigan's government and public policy. But that's not all. A MERS subscription also gives you access to our powerful legislative monitoring and tracking tools. Stay on top of every bill, amendment, and vote with real-time updates, detailed reports, interactive committee transcripts, legislative analysis tools, and more. Whether you're a policymaker, lobbyist, or just a concerned citizen, MERS keeps you informed with daily updates, exclusive interviews, and detailed reports. Subscribe today and gain access to our extensive archives. Stay informed, stay engaged, and stay ahead with MERS. Visit MERS.news to learn more and subscribe. That's MIRS.news. Don't miss out on the insights that matter most.
Mark, we teased at the outset here, do endorsements matter? Endorsements from politicians, endorsements from organizations, labor unions, chambers of commerce, etc. Newspapers, do they still carry the weight that they did? Do they still matter?
Jeff, I think it's part of the kind of the general anti-establishment era we're in, where institutions are trusted less than they used to be, sometimes far less. I think endorsements mean less than they used to, but I've always been very fact specific about the endorsements. If it's an organization, does it bring resources? Is that organization, that union, that chamber of commerce, whatever the case may be, are they going to spend resources talking to their audience and trying to persuade them to vote for the person that they've endorsed? So I think it's very fact specific. Then a lot of these endorsements, though, an out-of-state person endorsing somebody in Michigan, probably irrelevant. If you're unopposed in your race, who cares who endorses you in a primary if you're otherwise unopposed? So again, I think it's very fact specific, but in general, I think endorsements are probably worth less than they used to be.
Yeah, I would certainly agree with that. We've seen the diminishing value of endorsements overall as people's where they get their information becomes so balkanized. There's so many sources of information out there, and you're right. There's a growing distrust of kind of the status quo in what is said is kind of pejoratively the establishment and who they select, and so there is somewhat of a double-edged sword to that. I saw like Mike Cox running for the Republican nomination for governor, talking about John James getting the endorsement of the liberal / communist Detroit Free Press is a sign that John James is should be unacceptable to Republican voters, trying to make hay out of something that's just, largely nonsense. You're right about it. In so many cases, these are candidates that Michigan voters know very little about. And for these candidates who they know very little about to tout the endorsements of some out-of-state politician who they know even less about, if anything about, is completely irrelevant unless those endorsements come with resources that pay for voter contact. If Mark Kelly running for, the senator from Arizona who's built up a massive multi-million, tens of millions of dollar war chest to dole out to U.S. Senate and congressional candidates around the country, endorses, and it comes with independent expenditures of, hundreds of thousands of dollars or more, that's a little different than a name on a list, an irrelevant name on a list that no one's going to read on a website. And for like a candidate running unopposed like Mike Rogers to be trickling out the endorsements of state legislative Republicans, the reporter should be asking, Mike, why haven't all Republicans endorsed you? You're running unopposed.
What took so long?
Why are only like half of the legislators endorsing you? Are they that uninterested in your race? It exposes, I think, more than it closes in the way that, I guess, ham-handed politicians are using it. And so I do think that, and there are voters who still, probably certainly a lesser number, who read print, actual physical newspapers. I've seen in the old days older voters taking in the cheat sheet from the Detroit News or Free Press or Grand Rapids Press or whatever into the voting booth with them for those down ballot races where most voters know jack shit about. They don't know whether they're sending somebody to Washington, to Lansing, to the county seat. They don't care. They don't know. And so they do look to some sources for, okay, I've got to vote. I've got to choose between two or more candidates that I've never heard of for an office I don't know what it does. So, this is a cry for more civics education in the United States, but that's been a failing of of the U.S. education system and U.S. voter attention span for decades. And so I think that there was a time when people were much more in tune, when there wasn't so much competition for their attention. And now that people can go to podcasts or to virtual reality or to any, 1,000 streaming channels, they don't care that much about who's running for these very important offices, and they're certainly never going to do their homework. So there are going to be, if endorsements might matter to some of those voters, maybe they'll make a difference around the fringes. That's a wrap for this week as we head into what should be a very special holiday weekend, but it's been one tainted by Donald Trump's insistence on making it all about him. As for me, I'll enjoy the 250th celebration of the United States of America by keeping my fingers crossed that Trump does follow through on his plan to deliver a multi-hour speech in 107-degree heat.
And please head to our YouTube channel for the latest episode of our sidebar podcast, Greed, Grifts, and Grabs, the Trump Corruption Chronicles. We're finding the challenge is keeping that podcast short. The Trump Greed and Grift Gang gives us way too much material every week. And with that, we wish you all a happy and healthy 250th birthday celebratory weekend. Just make sure to hydrate.
And for the record, hydrate means water to accompany your beer. Now, if the Republic is still standing, Mark and I will be back next week. Thank you, as always, for your attention to this matter.
A republic, if you can keep it, is a presentation of Michigan citizens for a better tomorrow.